I don't think she'll mind. Let's see. Okay. So do we have everybody here? Well, some people are muted. I see. Obviously, you can't all respond at once. Isaac, should we go on the record, or are we waiting for anything else?
No, I think that that we can start. I just sent Commissioner Espinoza the information, so
Okay.
in case she decides to call in instead of using the Zoom app. I would just say we're going to give everyone the ability to control your mute settings, but we ask that everyone keep themselves muted when they're not talking and just unmute themselves when they are talking. We are recording this, and we are live streaming it as well. So people who aren't in this meeting may be watching outside. So keep that in mind. And with that, yeah, I think we can go on the record.
All right. So, Core Report, are we on the record?
We are now.
Okay. Hi. For the record, I'm Russell Fisk, Associate General Counsel for the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission. Today we're holding the public comment hearing in docket number 19-00286 UT. This is in a matter of potential amendments to the State Rural Universal Service Fund rule. This is the public comment hearing that was noticed in the order issuing NOPR a few months ago. So as was said in that order, the commenters may be limited to 5 minutes. However, it looks like since we only have 10 or 11 commenters, I don't think we need a 5-minute limit, maybe not too far beyond 8 minutes, something like that. But if someone needs to make comments, 10-minute comments, I think we'll be fine. We'll all be patient. So, I don't know if I have anything to add to that. I don't know what order we should go in. I mean, Isaac, I'm tempted to just use the order of the list that you made of the people of the Zoom attendees, because then at least you just go down the list and check it off. I don't know if anyone has a preference about staff going first or something like that. I don't care.
Russell, this is Bill Templeman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
The only thought I would have in that regard is the presentations relating to the NMECG. Steve Metz is going to provide a bit of an overview and on behalf of the whole group. And then there are two of the members who are going to present information relating to their individual companies. So for our little part of this, I would suggest that Steve Metz be the first, and then Paul Barish be next, and then Josh Bug be the following. So those three would be in that order.
Steve Metz, Paul Barish, and who was the third?
Joshua Bug.
And Russell, that's the order that they're on the list. So that should be fine if you go in order as far as they're concerned.
All right, that sounds good to me. And then I guess after we've gone through a round of these comments, if anyone has wants to respond to some other comments that have been made, then you could do so. Why don't we go ahead and start then? Let's start with Steve Metz. Steve, you're muted.
Russell, sorry, that I just meant that Steve Metz said that's the order of those three on the list when you get there. That's not the very first person on the list. I mean, like you said, I don't think it matters particularly.
Oh, okay. I thought we were starting with them. Okay.
But I think it might be best to, like you said, have Mike start, Mike Ripperger, and then give staff another chance at the end to respond to everything, and then just kind of.
Yeah, and I think actually all the commenters should have a chance to respond to anything, briefly respond to anything they feel they need to respond to at that time. But yeah, we can start with staff. I didn't hear from staff when I made that comment about going by the list, so I just didn't know if it mattered to staff at all. So, Okay, that's fine with me.
Well, if you want to just go straight off the list, the first person would be.
No, that's fine. It's fine. It doesn't matter to me.
Mr. Hearing Examiner, participants, commissioners, I'm fine with that. I apologize for not having the video going. I've got 3 cameras and none of them work, and I don't know why. So that's that. Let me just start with, first of all, I want to thank all the parties to the proceeding for everyone cooperating with each other and working together to get together something for the commission to work with in this proceeding. And I think that worked pretty well. I'll say that the record has been developed pretty well through this process. I think the commission can see pretty well where they're at with a lot of the proposals. I will say that, and this is consistent with what staff has already said in its comments, so I'm not adding anything new, is that we do not support the broadband only loop proposal. We think that that has the capacity to put a undue strain on the fund. I don't think that was in any way factored into the current status of the State Universal Service Fund. We also raised caution about the proposals based on need and the reimbursement based upon an interstate rate of return for intrastate costs and expenses. We think that there is a lot to that. It's not something the commission should walk into on short notice. If the commission is interested in exploring revision of that provision of the State Universal Service Fund rule, it should do so cautiously and in a separate proceeding. We also are not in support of the proposal in 1711-10-31I having to do with reimbursement for projects already built. We feel that the commission needs to vet projects prior to approving them. And also it raises a question of, if you were able to build it, then why do you need to come after the fact and request money for it? So we don't believe that on its face, that is a good proposal. We also do support a broadband definition of 25.3 for build out for the broadband program. But I want to caution, because it does not mean that the commission should automatically say no to any projects that aren't 25.3. We just say that that is an aspirational guideline. But if you're a person recommending a project that does not meet the 25.3 standard, and I understand there may be good reasons for that, then just provide an explanation for that in your project proposal. We believe the voice requirement should be maintained, and the 25% match from carriers requesting support from the State Universal Service Fund. So I think that's about it. Those are the main points. But I'm not saying anything that's not already in the record and that staff has not already said. I'm just sort of going back over it again. And I may, based upon the comment of the other parties, decide to reply to some of their comments. Thank you.
I was muted there. Thank you, Mike. So Isaac, who do we have next?
If we're going in just the order of the list, the next person is Timothy Goodwin from CenturyLink. And he is connected to the meeting. He will just need to unmute himself.
There we go. I believe I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very good. Well, again, I agree with Mike in that as I reviewed the comments, I thought that you know, the issues are really well addressed. There's a lot of thoughtful comments in there. Obviously, there's some difference of opinion on some of the particular issues, but I thought all the issues that were raised by the various parties are pretty well researched and thoughtful, so the commission has a good record to make a decision on them. I guess I'll start with the idea, and it's an idea that I've talked about in other rulemakings. It's an idea that I've talked about in other states. It's just, you know, a kind of an oversimplification, but I think it's an important concept. And that is, when we're talking about these funds, focus on consumers, not companies. And I think that's the way to make sure we get the most broadband to the most people in New Mexico, is that we focus on consumers and not companies. And the folks that are unserved by broadband should have equal access to support for it, regardless of where they live or who they're served by or whatever else it is. I think that we need to focus more on them than on us. And that's true even though one of these proposals and would definitely benefit us. It's the needs-based funding based on intrastate rate of return. Our rate of return is $24 million to the negative on intrastate separations basis. And so if that rule were adopted, CenturyLink would exhaust the entire fund. I don't think you should do that. That would be a very bad idea, even though it would benefit us as a company. It would be a bad idea. And the reason why it would be a bad idea is because I don't think that $24 million on an interstate separated basis is an accurate reflection of our need. It's based on separations that were or have been frozen for nearly 20 years. And during that 20 years, the FCC has said they're broken and we need to fix them. And during that 20 years, they haven't come up with a way to fix them. And so I think just that little, you know, separations that's frozen and broken is not a way to measure need. And so that's why we oppose that, even though that it would be one that is aimed at us, because those dollars that go away for quote need based on an intrastate rate of return are dollars that you can't spend on bringing broadband service to unserved or underserved areas in the state. And so we believe that you should not adopt the needs-based funding proposal based on its propensity to go, you know, benefit companies rather than unserved customers. The other thing that we think we should do is don't change the definition of the access line. There's been a lot of commentary on that, and I won't get too much into that, but I did think that the NMAG's reply comments were pretty well researched and developed on the legislative history about what an access line was when the SB 308 passed. And that was a well-litigated definition. I participated in some of that litigation on behalf of CenturyLink, where we talked about what's an access line and what isn't. And so it was right after that litigation that the Senate Bill 308 came about. And so I think the legislature is to be presumed to have addressed access line, even though it didn't define access line. It was addressed access line based on the definitions that the commission had established and litigated just months, a few months, about a year or so before that legislation passed. Again, that's a change that would benefit CenturyLink of the Southwest, not CenturyLink QC, the old Mountain Bell company, but CenturyTel of the Southwest. That's a change that would benefit us because we have several hundred broadband only lines. But again, those are dollars that would, if this change were proposed, this proposed change were adopted, those dollars would go to broadband lines that already exist, so served customers, rather than the unserved or unserved customers that the broadband fund is trying to reach. And so we don't think that's the right policy to bring more broadband to more people in the state. It's a little bit of a technical definition issue, but it's also very important. Next is don't define broadband internet access service to include a generic or other technology qualifier as is proposed. Because when you say that broadband is served by wireline, wireless, or other technology, you bring in satellite. And if you bring in satellite, then a location has to be unserved by satellite in order for it to qualify for support under the broadband fund. And almost every location in the state is served by satellite. So by adopting that definition, you would disqualify every location, or practically every location in the state, from getting broadband support. Now, I think that certainly satellite broadband has its place in the future if low elevation orbit satellites come to pass and actually work as their proponents say that they will. Maybe that'll help even more. But right now, while it's a helpful solution, it's not the kind of solution that works for everyone. And I think our funds should be focused on terrestrial, wireless, and fiber-based solutions for broadband and not satellite ones. And by that generic or other technology addition in the proposed definitions, you would create that problem. So just avoid that problem and don't adopt that change. There's another little technical definition change that we talked about in terms of defining the broadband service as 25.3, because depending on what you do, and we think that there's, and I'll get into it in a minute, but depending on what you do in terms of adopting a target for what recipients of broadband fund support are supposed to do with the money, you want to make sure that you define it all consistently. So if you are going to grant for 4.1 or 10.1 broadband networks, then you can't define broadband as 25.3, because then you would be granting for a broadband or making an unserved or served definition based on a conflicting definition. You just want to make them consistent. And so that's why we said don't have a speed in the definition of broadband internet service based on what you decide on what the goal is, whether it's a 4, 10, or 25. And we don't take a position on that. The trade-off that you have is if you build to 4.1 or 10.1, more folks get some broadband. If you build to 25, you're going to encourage bids to upgrade 10.1 speeds to 25. But you'll get 25. It's a higher speed. And so it's a question of fewer customers getting a better speed or more customers getting a worse speed. There's trade-offs there that that are difficult to make, and we don't take a particular position on them. We just want to know what the rules are, and then we'll bid accordingly. We do think you should reject the kind of the off-season grant proposal. And then finally, we think you should honor the RUSF contributors by supporting voice. Voice is what we collect on. It's an intrastate telecommunications service funded surcharge. It is not a tax to be used that is collected from everybody to be used for generic purposes. It's a surcharge that is collected among the community of interstate telecommunications voice customers for voice providers. And therefore, I think you have to keep the requirement to provide voice in the rule, because it is a voice supported fund. So it should go to providers of voice. And you need to be reluctant to give support, whether it's high cost support, access replacement support, or broadband fund support, to providers that do not contribute, or their customers do not contribute into the fund. But above all, we want these funds to be, and these rules to be predictable, and whatever rules you adopt, follow them and enforce them so that everyone knows what to expect, and we can move forward, hopefully, to serve as many folks in the state with broadband as possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. Isaac, who do we have next?
Next, we have Catherine Nicolau. I apologize if I pronounced the name wrong, from Sacred Wind.
That's perfect, Isaac. Good afternoon, Mr. Hearing Examiner and participants. My name is Catherine Nicolau. I'm the External Affairs and Marketing Manager for Sacred Wind Communications. And it is a pleasure to be able to address you today. So as we all know, there are 12 RLECs, or Rural Local Exchange carriers, in the state, including Sacred Wind. Sacred Wind is locally owned and headquartered in Yatahe, New Mexico, and together, New Mexico RLECs provide approximately 40,000 rural and tribal access lines in the state's most remote areas. RLECs have an obligation to provide service to customers in their territory regardless of cost. In addition, these companies are also expected to adopt new technologies, provide equity in their service offerings. And now we are tasked with the responsibility to ensure that our communities are pandemic ready and prepared for future crisis. And in rural communities, these obligations and expectations are more difficult to meet because the costs are higher than in urban areas. Currently, there are 196,000 New Mexican premises that lack broadband, according to Do It. So, Mr. Hearing Examiner and participants, there's great need in rural New Mexico. I think we can all agree that much more needs to be done to bridge the digital divide in New Mexico, and we have a long road ahead of us. I would like to mention as well that Sacred Wind has been an active participant since the beginning of this process by attending all workshops, providing comments and language during the rulemaking. Sacred Wind to date is the only RLEC that receives SRUSF support based on a petition for need. And in our experience, the process was technically complex, it was very lengthy and very expensive, as was noted in the Attorney General's comments. The full problem, though, is not just what it costs Sacred Wind, but the cost to low-income New Mexicans. As you know, this SRUSF was created to offer people living in rural areas the same or comparable services as those living in urban areas. We're not there yet. So the support also includes maintenance and support to ensure that networks can grow and expand and be ready for future crisis. After reading the other participants' comments, I think that Sacred Wind thinks that we have an opportunity in the face of crisis to work together as an industry alongside the PRC to make subsection 25 more predictable and streamlined for RLECs. You know, so as was mentioned, the NMECG suggests a new section dealing with requirements for an ETC that is an incumbent rural telecom carrier in establishing need-based support on a financial stability basis by using an intra-state rate of return mechanism. Sacred Wind Communications supports the NMECG's language with respect to subsection.
Catherine, I couldn't hear you. We lost you for a minute.
Yeah, I saw that it froze there. Thank you.
I want to go back a couple sentences.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate it. So if anything, this pandemic has showed us that we need more broadband. Our students and future generations of New Mexicans need more broadband. So now is the time, and it is the most critical time for the Commission to consider changes to Section 1711-1025 to ensure the financial viability of rural providers. Mr. Hearing Examiner and participants, thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Catherine, thank you. Just to clarify, not that it matters, I'm actually not the hearing examiner for this matter, as I am in some other telecom matters. With the rulemaking proceedings, we tend to be more or less formal. So I'm simply presiding over this comment hearing. Anyhow, it doesn't matter. I'm just clarifying that for no reason. Isaac, who do we have next?
Next, we have David LaFura from FCC Law on behalf of Smith Bagley.
That's David LaFuria.
Furia, my apologies.
It's okay, Isaac.
Thank you, Russell. I've got a tie on for the first time since March, and I guess you're the primary beneficiary of it today. So now that we're in the midst of a pandemic, you know, the imperative to focus on investing in infrastructure for those that lack broadband really is its greatest. And as you know, SBI has held firm throughout pretty much all the proceedings that we've been involved in here at the Commission that the state fund should require participants to be accountable for the funds they receive, and as much of the $30 million should be devoted to building broadband infrastructure as possible. You know, because of this situation, this really is a time for the Commission to meet the moment. Because while most of us take internet access for granted, I think as Catherine pointed out, 196,000 premises in New Mexico lack broadband, and there's still really only about 25% of Navajo households that have access to a high-speed broadband connection. In the meantime, the demand for both fixed and mobile broadband continues to grow rapidly. And really the only way to meet that need in these remote areas is through the programs like the broadband program that's been set up here that provide some funding for areas that otherwise, the business case to build just would not be there. And as you know, the fact is consumers will soon be making all of their calls, all their voice calls over the internet and not traditional telephone networks. And accordingly, I think we need to be working in a big picture sense towards developing laws and policies that meet these coming changes, which are only a few years away. So the legislature said the commission needs to devote a minimum of $5 million to the broadband program. And I want to just, rather than go through the nuts and bolts of SBI's comments, which hopefully you've all read, I really just want to just talk at a slightly higher level on the broadband fund. And note that last week, GVNW dropped into the record here 7 different scenarios for state USF for next year. And some of those scenarios would allow the commission to spend up to their $30 million cap. Now, given that this year the commission got about $16 million in proposals, SBI urges the commission to expand the broadband program to the greatest extent possible. It's also important to remember that for every dollar the commission allocates to the broadband program, it gets $1.25 back in investment as a result of the match that carriers provide. So when you all go back to that spreadsheet, SBI urges the commission to adopt scenario 6 in there, which would fund $13.3 million in broadband projects next year, plus another $3.3 million in matching fund investments for a total of $16.6 million in broadband projects. And these are the projects that are really, necessary to help students access distance learning and help people connect to receive remote medical care in rural areas. So, we understand the resistance to raising the rate floor and the benchmark and all that to avoid having rural residents see an increase in telephone bills. But SBI would point out that, raising the rate floor doesn't require companies to raise rates. It really only provides a benchmark for support. And for every $2 that the benchmark gets raised, about $1 million more, plus another $250,000 in match, is made available and can be invested each year for broadband. And the telephone companies that are, in the state are all eligible to apply for that support. We note that CenturyLink's basic phone rate that provides nationwide calling for Albuquerque customers is now priced at $60. And at the same time, the rural telco rates we've reviewed online range from 15 and change to well below the FCC's current urban benchmark of $34.81. And what this means is that urban citizens are shouldering the burden of subsidizing basic voice services in rural areas. And I guess that's the way it's always been. But SBI really at this point urges the commission to try to reduce the amount it spends to subsidize voice and maximize the amount invested in broadband infrastructure. And that's why we've, in our comments, recommended, not cementing $18 into the rule, the $18 benchmark. I mean, even if the commission does nothing at this point, it really should be addressing that benchmark as soon as possible, given the current situation. Now, if the commissions believe that raising the benchmark to $22 is too big of a jump for consumers, it could choose scenario 4 instead, which would raise the rate floor by only $2, but would still provide $15.1 million in broadband investment, combining $12.1 million from the fund with $3 more million in matching. And if at the end of the day it has to be $18, you can see in their scenario 2 provides $13.7 million in investment, combining $11.1 million with another 2.7 of match. Bottom line here, SBI urges the commission to spend to the cap and devote as much of the $30 million available to investing in broadband, and also to seek a legislative change next year that would start to do away with an access replacement mechanism that's overdue for retirement and will soon be obsolete as voice service starts migrating fully to broadband connections. 2 specific comments at the end on the rules. SBI strongly supports the AG and other commenters in recommending that the commission reject the proposed definitions that would allow some companies to no longer pay into the fund for broadband-only connections but also continue to draw out of the fund for those same connections. This is going to further and improperly shift the burden to urban citizens and potentially wipe out the fund as wireless carriers are moving through their 4G and 5G networks to all IP connections. Finally, with respect to the broadband rule, SBI urges the Commission to not adopt an after-the-fact proposal that would allow carriers to submit for reimbursement for investments they've already made with their own funds, essentially end running the competitive process that we believe really is in place and working quite well at this point. That's all we've got. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
David, thank you so much. Isaac, who do we have next?
Next, we have Timothy Shafrey from Smith Bagley Inc.
Tim Shaffrey, are you there? I don't see his name on here. I thought I saw him earlier.
He is on the
Oh,
list.
he is.
He's
he-
muted right now.
There's a little icon on his photo that shows a phone with a line through it. So I don't know if I think his connection's not working.
Hi,
Oh, wait.
Russell, this
you
is,
hear me?
this is
I
Pat.
can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Oh.
Yes,
Tim's on now.
yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, I apologize for that. I defer to the next speaker. David pretty much encapsulated everything for us. Thank you, David, and I will defer.
Okay, in that case, the next person we have signed up is Pat Ives of Cuddy McCarthy for Smith Bagley.
And I was just going to say, actually, David was making the comments on behalf of Smith Bagley, and Tim and I are just attending and answering any questions that we might be asked.
Great. Well, then in that case, next commenter we have signed up is Godfried Njadi of Mescalero Apache Telecom. I believe I heard Mr. Morales say earlier that he was with him and would speak through Mr. Morales' connection.
I apologize. Mr. Njadi is still en route to my office, so if he could come up a little later, I would really appreciate that.
Okay. So then next we would have Steve Metz of the New Mexico Exchange Carrier Group.
Okay, thank you, Russell, and good afternoon, everyone. Good to see everybody, and we appreciate the ability to make comments today. I'm going to try to speak on behalf of NMECG as the current president. NMECG is an association of several of the rural carriers in the state, the incumbent rural carriers, and along with, well, Windstream is a larger carrier, but they're incumbent rural also. And then there's several other providers that are in similar situations in MECG, you know, particularly Sacred Wind, La Jicarita, LECO, and Mescalero Apache that would also have some similar interests as NMECG. NMECG participated in the workshops. We submitted initial written comments and response comments. NMECG's comments were presented with the good faith intent of trying to improve the state Rural Universal Service Fund and increasing the participation in the fund by the carriers that provide primarily wireline voice and broadband services to the consumers in the rural high-cost areas in New Mexico. And we believe this was consistent with the Commission's request at the time of the rulemaking, basically to try to increase the participation in the fund. Just as we've done in every step since the fund was restructured by the legislature, we've also tried to work together with the purpose that the funds used to ensure customers affordable universal service in the rural areas. And keeping in mind that the Rural Telecom Act expressly states now that the fund is meant to support broadband internet access as well as the voice service. NMECG urges the Commission to review and consider the comments with an eye towards the needs of the rural consumers. And basically, we view that this is a transition period for the fund. You know, several commenters have talked about the access support, which has been around for years, but it is also in when the Senate Bill 308 was passed, they put the requirement in there that 60% of those funds are meant for broadband and have to be spent on broadband. So we believe that was the start of moving this fund away from voice, or not totally away from voice, but moving it more towards broadband, as several people have provided. One of the things that the COVID-19 pandemic has really proven, that there is a greater need for broadband. Everyone sees that. We're all using it today. It's crucial when you consider the possible amendments of the fund. So NMECG put in 2 different proposals that everybody has commented on. One thing about those 2 proposals is that NMECG suggested them regarding the C-ball lines and regarding the needs-based support. But the way that the workshops worked out, the way that the pandemic came about, those never were really vetted. I mean, we presented them one time, but there were no really alternatives to them looking at. So as a result, those are what ended up in as a draft rule. But basically on the C-ball lines, the access support mechanism is basically a substitute for a cost-based recovery of a network. It's the same network that's used for voice and the same network that's used for broadband. The only difference in those networks is that the C-ball line does not have a connection to a switch, but the cable is the same. Basically the same network is used for all of those. So from that standpoint, it makes sense. Under the current definition, there are rural consumers that are and rural companies, but there's a disincentive for those customers or for those companies to offer broadband only lines. And the reason is because if they offer the broadband only line, they lose the support they're getting from the fund. Therefore, they can't support to pay for the network. And there'll be some specifics offered that by some of the other companies later. So we think, whether in this rulemaking or, another process, eventually we need to get to supporting broadband only lines, just like the federal fund has evolved to supporting them as well. Essentially, customers that aren't able to get C-ball lines are being forced to pay for a service that they don't want and don't need. If they don't want to have a voice line, then they shouldn't have to, but this provides that disincentive, as I said. The other big proposal that we had was on the rate of return, or the needs-based support. And we had put in a proposal in there about using the FCC's rate of return, because that's something that's been developed and argued, and from that standpoint, it makes sense. Whether or not you use current separation rules and all of that would be for discussion, but there are many states that have just a simple formula that has a rate of return or a process that the company can go to and do a simple showing to show what they need. With respect to CenturyLink's comment of saying that they would take up the entire fund, it's not even designed for CenturyLink to be part of that concept, because it's meant for incumbent rural carriers, and CenturyLink hasn't had rate of return regulation for years. So, so perhaps the CenturyLink of the Southwest might be part of that, but they don't even qualify under that part of the statute. So we don't see that would be the case. But in any respect, what happened to Sacred Wind just can't happen to the small companies. You go in there and it costs more to get any support than the support could be worth. It's the same reason that the small companies haven't gone in for rate cases for all of these years. If you're a company with 1,000 lines, are you going to go in there and ask for a $5 a month rate increase, which would be, not be really hard to get, but you'd get $60,000 a year of revenue out of it. It would cost you more than that to go through the case. So somehow there has to be a simplified process, and that's what we're trying to advocate for in that rulemaking. And whether or not the specific language we had there is the way to go. Conceptually, we think that the fund needs to have that kind of a mechanism. And I think with that, we didn't see any other alternative proposals that people have offered on those other than to just say they're not good ideas. I mean, clearly we don't claim to have 100% the answers, but we think that the concepts are right, and we think they're right for the rural consumers to be able to provide those services. Again, with the cost or the needs-based support, we agree that unserved customers, broadband money should go to unserved customers, and that should be the priority. But the companies that took the initiative to put the broadband into those customers deserve to get some kind of a return for it also. And that's where the need support would come in, or could come in. And then finally, on the benchmark rate, we understand that every increase in the benchmark does result in a reduction to the fund. I mean, that's happened every time, but it's also going to result in a increase in rates to rural consumers. And granted, the companies would not absolutely have to raise rates, but Mr. LaFuria mentioned that the state's going to gain back some investment if they do that. I would argue that the state might lose some investment if they do that too, because if we can't, if we lose the support from the fund and can't increase the rates to the consumer or don't raise, then we're going to have to reduce the investment. That's really the only choice. So I'll conclude my comments there, and happy to answer any questions later. And thank you for all your time.
Thank you, Steve. So I think we have Paul Breach next. Is that right, Isaac?
Correct, yes. We have Paul connected. He'll just need to unmute himself.
Can you hear me now?
You can.
Okay, thank you. Russell, thank you for your time this afternoon. My name is Paul Breach, and I am General Manager of Baca Valley Telephone Company, and we are out of Des Moines, New Mexico, and serving Union and Colfax counties. And I won't go into a lot more detail. Steve Metz covered NMECG's position pretty well on and what I'd like to talk about specifically is CBOL. We took up the challenge and the issue of CBOL some time ago, and part of it was based on meetings and conversations actually with several commissioners. Those commissioners didn't realize that the small companies did not, in fact, offer broadband only. And as I explained to the commissioners, that we don't do that because the fund is based on dial tone. And so we just followed that up and tried to pursue this CBOL as best we can. We think that CBOL, and I think Mr. Godwin made a good point that he said we need to think about consumers over companies, and I think that's what we're all after. Consumers, low income, students. I think nowadays, this virus and everything else going on, unemployment, layoffs, I think it's important to think about consumers over companies. We have stranded investments in our companies similar to what others do. When cell phones became popular, people dropped dial tone. Well, when they dropped dial tone, we couldn't let them keep internet as well. They did it on their cell phones with hotspots, and that's simply not working right now when they have students at home. So we would love to give broadband only to some of our customers, especially the low income ones that have students at home. But we've got to get some way. We have invested, our company, millions of dollars in fiber and copper and equipment, similar to all the other companies, including CenturyLink. We have to be able to pay those loans back. And so CBOL is a start. We've got some more work to do on it. We appreciate what everybody's done in the workshops. We may have some more work to do, as I said. Some of the commenters said that we would have 55 to 60% increase in customers getting broadband only. We haven't gone out and pulled all of our customers, but we seem to think that we might have a 20% increase. in customers that want broadband only. And I don't think anybody knows. I don't know how the AG or anybody else can say that you're going to have this tremendous amount of customers and bankrupt the fund. I don't think anybody knows. I certainly think, I'm not naive, that we're going to have some increases, but what does that do? And I'll go back to Mr. Godwin again. It's consumers. It helps consumers and students and low income. So that's what it's all about. I think we need to roll up our sleeves and have some answers. We need everybody to participate if we have more workshops. But I think Mr. Metz explained most of it pretty well, that, you know, we support CBOL. We support a mechanism to try and keep CBOL. If we allow that and the customer drops the dial tone, then we continue to pick up the USF. And that's not a net, that's a net zero to the fund because it was already paying for that. What's going to affect the fund, and I realize, is the customers that don't currently have service that say, hey, I want internet only. Then we would certainly collect from the fund, and by rules, those customers would not pay. So I think we have some work to do on it, but I appreciate the time to let us talk about this a little bit. And as Mr. Metz said, I stand for questions at some point later on. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Isaac, who do we have next?
Next, we have Joshua Bogue from Tularosa Basin Telephone Company.
Hi, I'm Josh Bug with Tularosa Basin Telephone Company. A little bit about Tularosa. We were established in 1996 after 4 telephone companies went together to find TBTC. We bought exchanges that serve Tularosa, Carrizozo, and Cloudcroft. And across those exchanges, we have about 3,000 access lines between residential and business today. Just to touch on the needs-based support, a streamlined effort on it. TBTC receives access reduction support payments from the State Rural Universal Service Fund and uses that support to build and maintain our network. We continue to expand our broadband services as customer demand for broadband increases. You know, we've spent about $12 million in the last 4 years in bearing fiber to the home. Over the last few years, we've lost about 2,000 access lines. At the same time, we're receiving more and more requests for newer improved broadband services, and we are doing everything we can to respond and meet that growing need. Like I had said, TBTC has invested $12 million over the last 4 or 5 years to our customers, but in doing so, we've had to take out substantial USDA RUS loans to keep up with that customer's need for bandwidth, and we still have a lot of work yet to do. We rely on the support from the NMSUF for our operational costs and the repayment of those loans. TBTC is concerned about our financial condition. Its interstate revenues have been dropping due to the loss of access lines, and we depend more and more on that support to keep us in operation. Over the last few years, we've considered going before the commission to seek need-based support under the commission's current rule. We've met with staff up there in Santa Fe to discuss the process and really learned about, you know, the experiences of Sacred Wind and what they had to go through to acquire their need-based support. You know, with the legal fees and filing fees and everything else with it, we may be looking at approximately $350,000 to conduct a financial showing to justify that need-based support request as the rules written now. Unfortunately, you know, we concluded that the current rule on need-based support is not a realistic option for us at this time. The requirements to qualify for support aren't very clear. That, plus taking into consideration Sacred Wind's experience with the delays and extreme expense they went through, has led us to conclude that additional support under the need-based support rule is not truly available or justifiable. As a result of that, TBTC fully supports the proposal from the NMECG to amend the need-based support section of the rule in order to provide a streamlined and specific mechanism for obtaining need-based support to ensure financial stability. With more certainty in the rule, we would be able to approach a commission for additional support if needed to maintain our financial ability to continue offering affordable voice and broadband service for our customers, as well as expanding the broadband service to meet the growing demand of broadband, in our areas. Without the requested amendment or some other change in the current rule, we're very concerned right now that we'll need to cut back on services and reduce expenses. And with that, it could possibly mean a workforce reduction right now. So I asked the commission and staff to please give serious consideration to this proposal of the streamlined need-based support and support the provision of the rule. And I thank you guys for letting me talk today. Thank you.
Thanks, Joshua. So I think we've gone through we've gone through everyone in one round, and
Yeah, so let's first check with Bill Templeman and see if he wants to add anything.
Okay.
Bill, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Thank you for that opportunity. I do not need to add anything at this time. I'll take the opportunity of having the microphone to suggest you check in to see whether Godfrey has arrived at Alan Morell's office.
Yep, that was going to be the next question. Mr. Morales, do you have Mr. Andrade with you yet?
I apologize. He is still a few minutes out. He's at Alto headed here. So if we need to move on, we'll just move on. I apologize.
all right, well, it's no problem. So what I was going to do is invite any responses that anyone has to any of the comments that have been made, or just anything they want to add. But something I'd like to add first that you might want to respond to, because it's something new. Commissioner Fishman is considering some proposals for the rule, a couple of proposals that he'd like to, if anyone wants to make any comments on now, he'd like to hear, and he will probably be putting suggested language in the record. As you know, the record in this matter closes September 22nd. So we may do a process. I don't know exactly how we're going to do this yet, where where the language is placed in the record and there's a chance to respond. The first area in which Commissioner Fishman is interested in possibly amending the proposed the rule that goes is in addition to what's in the proposed rule. Concerns the role of staff in the broadband program application process. Any of you who listened to the open meeting last week may have heard that when the broadband program applications were being presented by staff, some of the commissioners were surprised to find out that staff doesn't make recommendations in the process. They simply present the applications as to whether they meet the minimum criteria, and whether their own questions, their own logical or technical questions have been answered with regard to the applications. And then staff has no involvement in the ranking process. Commissioner Fishman is considering possibly proposing language that would do so, that would give staff a role in recommending and ranking applications. I'll tell you the other part, and then I'll go to see if anyone wants to comment on these issues. Commissioner Fishman is also interested in raising the issue of resiliency and how the companies receiving support intend to remain sustainable. Brian, I'm sorry. Because I'm reading this from your email, I want to make sure I'm understanding. Is this with regard to the broadband program itself? Sorry, Brian. I just need a little clarification there.
No worries, Russell. And admittedly, the resiliency thing was it came up in a conversation I had with him between the open meeting and this hearing. So all that to say that it's not a concept that's fully fleshed out yet. I think what he's getting at with that concept is the whole issue of sustainability. If a company walks away with $2 or $3 million in ratepayer funds, we want to make sure that the company is going to be there long enough to provide the service that we're supporting. Of course, that's part of the process. That's part of the reason we do an ETC process, is to make sure they're fiscally strong and solvent. So I'm going to have to explore that more with him. And if he feels strongly about continuing that, we will drop some language in the record and give people an opportunity to respond.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. I see. So we're going to go forward with the process in which any commenters may respond to those proposals, as well as to respond to other commenters. I do see that Mr. Anjadi has arrived, so we might just let him make his initial comment first.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I apologize for my lateness and tardiness, just taking care of some business, but trying to do the best we can. A little bit about me, Godfrey Anjadi, General Manager for Mescalero Apache Telecom, the state's only tribally owned telephone company. The tribe back in 1995-96, under Mr. Wendell Chino at the time, wanted to tribalize a lot of the functions on the reservation, and telephone was one of them. Back then, we didn't have any broadband. We didn't have anything. But our tribal leadership had vision in order to move forward to try to provide the services that were needed by our tribal members at the time. Back then, it was a digital divide, one that we didn't have any telephone services at all. So the tribe took it upon himself to provide these services. Again, as you can see, Indian country is lacking always in all of these functions. Today, broadband is one of the things that's needed the most, especially in this COVID crisis that we're in. It's one of the main functions that was always needed on reservations for communications, to be able to provide services. If you can look at some of the other tribal entities within the state that have suffered greatly from the lack of communications on a reservation, this is something that has been needed wholeheartedly for any country for a long time. And the state has a lot of tribal lands within its within the borders of the state of New Mexico. So as being one of the only ones that have been trying to get services, and I heard what Brian was saying about how there are kind of wondering if some of these new companies that are going to be coming up and trying to provide services on tribal lands are going to be able to move forward. I think support dollars are going to be needed even more. As we look at it on CBOL, it's internet only. I mean, that's going to be some of the services that probably will be the only ones there. But as we keep moving forward, this fund should not be taken for granted. It's something that I rely on in providing services to my people here on a reservation, since I am a tribal member of the Mescalero Apache tribe. This is something that's wholeheartedly needed, and it's something that we move forward. So I wholeheartedly go with what the New Mexico Exchange Carrier Group is trying to provide. There's not another mechanism to put in its place that can really provide the services that we need. And anything, any country needs more broadband, a fund that probably we could break the bank just by ourselves trying to provide the services of providing what was needed. As we look at wireless programs on our reservation, we'll never see 5G. It's a great thing. It's something that is provided in urban areas where there's plentiful people that can subscribe to it. But in Mescalero, we only have 5,000 local people there. So how much money are they going to put into our area to provide those kinds of services? It's something that's way off. Maybe in 10, 15 years, we'll get that. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. By that time, Starlink or any of these other technologies that are circling the earth might take over by that time, who knows? But for right now, today, there is a pandemic. I do need these funds. And these are some of the things that I do need. Seabold, I've been losing some of those customers quite a bit. You know, what can I say? Any country needs it. And I advocate for that. And anything you can do to provide commissioners, if you can keep moving forward with what we need to do, we're almost there. We're getting services to all of our tribal members. And these are things that we're looking for and off the reservation too. Anybody near us, we're trying to do that same service too. But again, New Mexico needs more broadband services, and taking away is not the way to do it. As we keep moving forward, we need more funding. And thank you for hearing me out, commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Anjadi. So now we could go through for a round of reply comments from anyone who has reply comments. And Isaac, I would say should we just go through the list and people could say whether they do or not?
That's probably a good way to do it. Yeah. Otherwise it would be kind of confusing to select one person at a time. Before we start that, I just wanted to convey a message I just received from Commissioner Espinoza. She said that she tried to call in, but was unable to connect. But she wanted me to let everyone know that she did try to join, and she'll take a look at the transcript and everything afterwards, after the hearing's over. So, and Russell, she'll want us to provide a recap as well. So I just wanted to pass that on.
Okay, thanks.
So we can just go back around in order and see if people have any questions or follow-ups. So we'll go back to Mike from staff.
Thank you. I guess I'll start with any reply comments to the other parties. And right now I don't. I think that I don't have anything to add on that. I think we said our piece both in our comments and our initial comments. Now, in response to these two new issues in the rulemaking, you know, one has to do with the role of staff. Staff is opposed to a process whereby the decision-making for the projects is shifted from the commission to staff through a automated ranking process. There's nothing wrong with you know, getting information on the record and then you know, putting that in a form for evaluation, or even in a form that where you can take it and you can sort it in certain ways that's more useful for the commission to make a decision. But it's, first of all, conceptually, I think we oppose that. We think that the process as it's structured now makes sense. However, if the commission were to move forward on this process, we haven't seen any language in the rule. We don't know what this proposal would look like. We would recommend that it be, if it is considered in any earnestness, then it should be moved to another phase of rulemaking in this case, because rulemakings for the State Universal Service Fund never end. We have them every year. Second of all, the proposal having to do with sustainability of carriers in certain areas, you know, that's something that could be explored. But again, that's very involved. It's not unlike some of the proposals that were put forth by some of the rural carriers in this rulemaking. It's not something that should be jumped into with haste. There's a lot of information and data that needs to be considered. So staff also would recommend, if the commission wishes to take a serious look at that concept, that also be rolled into another rulemaking after this one is concluded. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Who do we have next, Isaac?
We have Timothy Goodwin of CenturyLink.
Thank you. First, on the proposals from Commissioner Fishman, I don't know enough to comment about the resiliency one, so I'll just skip over that. On the staff one, I think Mike Ripperger makes some good points. However, I also think, you know, as much input as the commissioners can get, that's helpful. But if you move the staff over into a recommendation and ranking role, then one of the things that you'd want to, that I probably need to think about more, but it's an issue that I think deserves important thought, is what side of the ex parte wall do you want the commissioners to be on if they take on that role? Because right now they're on the advocacy side, so we can talk to staff members and they can talk to us. But if they're part of the decision-making, ranking, recommendation process, does that move them over to the advisory side where they would be within the ex parte, kind of thing? I know it's not exactly a contested case scenario, nor do I think it is a good idea for it to be a contested case type of situation. But those are some of the issues that I think you'd want to think about, and that I'd need to think about a lot before really giving a firm opinion there. That's just kind of some issues that pop up in my head as I see, this proposal kind of for the first time. With respect to some of the comments that were made, I just wanted to touch on a couple things. One is the idea of this isn't for CenturyLink. Well, the statute applies to everyone. It says 63-9H6A says the commission shall establish and maintain a state universal service fund to maintain and support universal service that is provided by eligible telecommunications carriers, including commercial mobile radio services carriers, as determined by the commission. So it's all ETCs, including wireless folks that are eligible under the fund. That's under 63-9H6A. Under 63-9H6C, it says the fund shall be competitively and technologically neutral, equitable and non-discriminatory in its collection and distribution of funds. And then it has to be, it goes on to say it has to be a predictable and sufficient support mechanism as determined by the commission that ensures universal service, not just in NMECG territory, but universal service in the state. And then subsection E of 63-9H6E says all incumbent, not all incumbent rural, but all incumbent telecommunications carriers and competitive carriers are already designated as eligible telecommunications carriers for the fund shall be eligible for participation in the fund. So it's for us, and it just goes back to the issue of customers, consumers versus companies. Because that's, I thought, one of the most important things that you can take away from this hearing are, number one, the 196,000 broadband connections that Catherine was talking about. That, I mean, they're not broadband connections, they're homes that lack broadband connections, right? That's a huge number, it's important. I don't know if that's exactly the right number or what speed that is. Whatever the number is, it's too big and we need to solve it. And whatever that number is, I guarantee you that most of those 196 or whatever the number is are served in CenturyLink territory. And those customers need to be served with broadband more than anybody else. And the other, I mean, just as much as everybody else. The other thing I think is that you should take away from this hearing is that everybody said that the pandemic and COVID has really revealed a massive need for equal access to broadband across customers and providers across the state. And I was at a seminar the other day and said, you know what, it's not telephone service anymore, it's not wireless or anything like that. What the bare minimum for participation in society these days, as revealed by the COVID-19 pandemic, is what we're on right now in that Zoom call. You need a Zoom capable connection. And you know, that's what folks need, no matter where they live, no matter who their provider is. 196,000, that's way more than $5 million a year can cover. We've got a bigger problem than we can solve with the limited funds that we have. So we want to focus the fund on those unserved customers that are part of that 196,000, get them these Zoom capable connections, and you know, for the benefit of all those folks, no matter where they live. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Who do we have next, Isaac?
Next, Catherine from Sacred Wind.
Thank you. The only comment that I have is in regards to the role of staff in terms of the broadband program, I think it's important to note that perhaps without a state broadband plan that identifies priorities, it may be difficult to expect staff to make such recommendations in terms of which applications to support. That was the only thing that we have.
Thanks, Catherine. Isaac, who do we have next?
David from Smith Bagley.
Hi, just one comment. It occurs to me listening to the comments around the consumer broadband only loops that this is a little more complicated than just simply putting it in the definition and seeing what happens. I don't know if we need to go to a case-by-case analysis, but I'm thinking about a consumer who's paying, say, $15.40 for basic phone service, then moves to broadband and is now paying $50 or $75 for a broadband line. And if at that point the line is no longer eligible for access reduction support, how much of a loss is that? Is it $5 for one company and $30 for another? Because if a carrier was living on 15 and change plus an ARC subsidy, and it moves to $50 from the consumer for broadband, it seems to me that the effects are probably different for all the carriers and need to kind of be teased out instead of just going to this, moving this definition right now and having the effects all play out without really understanding it fully. I think we ought to do that part of this in a proceeding that kind of teases out the facts a little more so everybody can see what the puts and takes are when a carrier, because presumably when the carrier provides a broadband connection, it's already built it, it's been subsidized to do it, and it's now available for the consumer to select. And I think there's a lot of moving parts here that really ought to be examined in a separate proceeding before we go down that road.
Thanks, David. Isaac, who do we have next?
Let's check if Timothy or Pat want to add anything else for Smith Bagley.
I do not. This is Pat Ives.
I do not. This is Tim Shaffrey. Thank you, though.
Okay, thank you. Isaac,
Then
who's next?
next with Steve from NMECG.
Okay, thanks. Just a couple of things real quick. With respect to my statement earlier about not being met for CenturyLink, clearly that's not not the whole fund is what I was talking about. What I was referring specifically to was the section based on a request for a needs-based support based on rate of return. Clearly the fund is designed for all carriers, so I apologize if I was confusing there. Regarding the new proposals, I mean, obviously NMECG would have to hear them out. I do think the one on sustainability is a relevant one. I think that kind of goes along the lines with the needs-based support in certain areas where, if you look at the service area of Valley in particular, I mean, we're realistically the only game in town in the Boot Hill area. I mean, their Verizon is there, AT&T is there, along the interstates, but as far as residential internet, we're really the only high-speed one. There's a couple of wireless ISPs, but I think it's important that the commission look at that, and I think that kind of goes along the lines with the rate of return or the needs-based support on at some level at least. So, and Mr. LaFuria's comment was right on line with the on the C-ball thing. It isn't that simple. It is a different number for every company, and I do think a further proceeding or some type of workshop or whatever to further discuss that issue would make sense, because it's literally some companies, they're looking at an $80 a month decrease in support if they go C-ball, and that's why they're not doing it. So I think that's worthy of further consideration also. So thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Isaac, who do we have next?
Paul from Baca Valley.
Thanks, Isaac. I appreciate that. And I'll just be brief. I agree with Mr. LaFuria and Steve's comments on working together and looking at each company as far as Seabowl is concerned. You know, if you look at the color of my hair and the lack of, I've been doing this, I'm going on 47 years at this company. And what we did in the past was we got the details, we worked out issues, and we came up with some solutions. And there's solutions to all of these problems, including Seabowl. So I appreciate the time, and I look forward to working further on this with everyone. Thank you, Russell.
Thanks, Paul. Isaac, who do we have next?
Josh from Tularosa Basin.
Yeah, I think everybody has touched on it's about the consumer and not the individual companies. You know, in TBTC's case, the broadband fund versus a USDA loan, we're able to roll out a lot more fiber to a lot more customers, you know, obtaining a loan from USDA and then using support to pay back those loans. But I like I said, I do agree with everybody. I think there is a solution here to work out. And I look forward to working with everybody in order to find that, hopefully. Again, thanks for letting me speak today.
Thanks, Joshua. Isaac?
I guess Bill Templeman.
Yeah, nothing more for me. Thank you.
Okay, then Godfried from Mescalero Apache.
Just a short little comment, and that's just to take care of our customers. One thing that we did do early on is take a pledge from the FCC asking us not to disconnect anybody, making sure that they have the services that they need. Now those people in arrears, so you know there's another problem. Am I going to absorb those costs and try to keep them going, or do we have to keep just disconnect them and say that's it? You know, and you know with our tribe and the needs that are there, you know, we chose to keep those customers working no matter what, and hopefully try to find some funding for that just to be able to provide those services that are needed. Especially on the Seabowl portion, if we're going to raise that, that's going to be a shock to our customers. It's something that's not needed in any country right now, and especially during this pandemic that we're in. That's something that's I am totally against. So if we can keep something, making decisions in a crisis situation, this doesn't make sense to me right now. Something that maybe we should kick that can down the road a little bit further and try to examine it as we come out from the crisis that we're in.
Thank you, Mr. Jati. Well, I guess we've gone through everyone for initial and response comments. Unless anyone has a burning desire to make a final comment, which I'm looking, I don't see anyone trying to do so, then thank you for participating today.
Russell, this is Brian Harris.
Hey, Ron.
Can I make one brief comment?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
I just wanted to say about staff's role. Several people did express some concern about that. I want to just make sure that there's nothing in the proposal that you're going to see that changes the substantive authority of either the commission or the staff. The commission will always have final say on how these grant funds are awarded. But in Telecom Bureau's role as an advisor to the staff, I think this commission's way of saying what kind of advice they're looking for, what kind of advisement they need to make this decision. There are numerous and complicated criteria that each entity has to satisfy to be on the list of eligible candidates for support. And there's going to come a day when there's more requests for the fund than there are actual funds. So there is going to need to be some analysis of that and to figure out which projects best meet the statutory and rule criteria is something the commission will be counting on the Telecom Bureau to supply. So It's not a major change in authority. It's no change in authority at all. The final responsibility will always rest with the commission. And I once again just want to say, sorry for the late date of this proposal. I will commit, and Commissioner Fishman will commit, to getting something on the record as soon as possible, so it doesn't delay this process. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, I just had that question about the process regarding any of these supplemental proposals, so we can, you know, because we've got a record closing and we don't have a proposal, and we need opportunities to at least say something about it. So what do you envision in terms of the process from here on out, Russell?
Tim, yeah, I assume we're going to be receiving any proposed rule language very soon to be filed in the record. And there'll be a chance to respond, you know, in a reasonable amount of time. I think we'd still be able to stay within the September 22nd closing date of the record with that. So I think.
So I'm sorry to interrupt. That's not accurate. The closing date stated in the NOPR is today. It says the record will be closed today.
Well, that seems odd. Why would we close it today? Oh, look at that.
That is odd.
Well, that's not what I see. I'm looking, Isaac, I'm looking at paragraph F. It says, the commission hereby orders that that date, and that's the record closing date, shall be 20 days following the September 2nd public hearing, that is September 22nd. I'm looking at paragraph F of the NOPR order?
Huh. Because the actual NOPR, I guess, didn't get that. It has the same date listed. So I guess that's something we'll have to talk about as to, I mean, I think we could extend that, but we would have to publish something in the New Mexico Register to do it.
Yeah, I think actually you're right. That when it comes to extend, if that was a misprint in the NOPR, then, you know, the commission did order September 22nd as the record closing date. But if there's a misprint in the NOPR, I think that's easily fixable, especially if you're extending the time. So we will we'll let all of you know very soon what's going on there. All righty. Okay, well, with that, I will say bid adieu to all of you. Have a wonderful rest of the week.